Tortellini, or Child, is returning to Genshin Impact with his third banner. His potential, however, is still overlooked by many people who are unfamiliar with his less than traditional playstyle. In this video, we'll be explaining what Tortilla can offer and whether or not he's worth your Primogems. Before You Wish is a video series dedicated to noting the good, bad, and ugly of characters in Genshin Impact. Many aspects of a unit are not apparent to the average Genshin player even after playing them in the trials due to the inaccurate testing environment that can make characters seem better than they truly are. Explicitly noting the pros and cons of these characters in full detail should inform you about how to push them to their highest potential and what it costs to do so. As always, if you enjoy a character for reasons like their voice actor, aesthetic, or personality, these videos are by no means meant to stop you from spending your Primogems on them. Instead, they should help prepare you for the type of problems that you'll need to solve or work around to meet your gameplay expectations. Let's begin by explaining Child's elemental skill, which is what sets him apart from other characters. When he casts his elemental skill, he'll enter a melee stance, allowing him to deal Hydro damage with melee attacks. After exiting the stance by recasting the skill or swapping off, Child enters a period of downtime based on how long he stayed in this stance. While in the melee stance, Child will apply and trigger Riptide, which deals Hydro damage in an AoE for more Hydro application and damage. There are many ways of triggering different types of Riptide, which we cover in our quick guide video. Child's elemental skill is the core of what makes him a strong unit. His Hydro application and fast attacks allow off-field DPS units to consistently trigger reactions and passives for more damage. Both his melee attacks and Riptide apply Hydro, allowing him to function as the on-field Hydro applier. On the other hand, Child's elemental skill is also seen as his biggest flaw because of its dynamic and potentially long cooldown. A large portion of the Genshin community seems to believe that his elemental skill's downtime cuts into his DPS significantly by preventing him from entering the melee stance to deal more damage. While it's true that the skill's downtime does force Child to swap off, this is not as large of an issue as people believe it to be. If players play Child's rotations correctly in his best teams, downtime is less of an issue, as Child needs to give his supports field time to cast their skills in bursts anyway. In addition to his elemental skill, Child's constellations are also misunderstood. Again, many people have the misconception that his full potential is locked behind his 6th constellation. But there are two issues with this line of thinking. First of all, Child needs to use his melee burst to make full use of his 6th constellation. However, in most sustained Child rotations, he prefers to use his ranged burst. It's easier to vaporize and it refunds energy, allowing him to use his bursts again in the following rotation without requiring much energy recharge. Secondly, Child's team will not perform as well with a focus on personal damage compared to a team that makes extensive use of his supports and sub-DPS units. This means that Child's teams should be played in a way at C6 as they are played in C0 or C1. Additionally, players who can afford Child's 6th constellation will likely have enough investment to clear content in a single rotation, rendering the additional melee uptime useless. Child's 1st and 3rd constellations are his most valuable. His 1st constellation allows for more flexibility in terms of his melee uptime while increasing his team's damage. This is because staying in his melee stance for longer increases Child's Hydro damage alongside his Hydro application rate, which allows off-field DPS units to deal more damage from reactions. His 2nd constellation is mostly useless as Child does not have very high energy requirements, especially if he consistently uses his range burst to get the energy refund. His 3rd constellation increases his skill talent levels, which boosts his personal melee damage. His 4th constellation is a double-edged sword. It allows him to passively apply Hydro off-field and enable reactions like Freeze. However, the additional Riptide ticks from his Constellation 4 occasionally trigger Vaporize instead of his burst, causing a damage loss. His 5th constellation increases damage slightly if Child is being played as a carry and increases damage significantly if he's being played as a burst DPS. 6th constellation does very little outside of co-op. It's still not recommended to roll for Child's constellations as they don't offer that much of a change in his playstyle, nor do they offer significant damage increases. Now that we've corrected some misconceptions about Child, let's cover exactly why he's such a strong unit. First, his Hydro application allows Xiangling, who is one of the game's strongest DPS units, to vaporize a large portion of her burst. A great example team that demonstrates this synergy with Xiangling is the International team, which is composed of Child, Kazuha, Xiangling, and Bennett. This team has excellent single target damage and shines especially in AoE situations. Child's damage and Hydro application allow Xiangling to vaporize her burst, and the buffs provided by Bennett and Kazuha make light work of almost any content in the game. Child also possesses high burst damage that can be valuable for quickly defeating weaker enemies on abyss floors or for speedrunning. His burst is also functionally a 40 cost, as Child generally prefers to use his ranged burst over his melee burst, in which the energy refund makes his personal energy requirements significantly lower. Lastly, Child allows players to replace Xingqiu. Child provides enough on-field Hydro application to benefit a number of teams such as Vaporize or Electrocharge comps. Filling this role allows Xingqiu to be used elsewhere for teams that require Hydro as an off-field presence, such as Hu Tao or Dilute comps. Child is a great unit, but he still has his issues. First off, he requires a great amount of understanding to be played at his full potential. Though he's not particularly mechanically difficult to play, his cooldowns and team rotations should definitely be taken into consideration. This can be learned through experience, but it might take a while for players who are more used to team less strict rotations like Razor or Venti or Gene teams, where characters just spam their elemental bursts. Additionally, Child's teams are highly dependent on his teammates. In the international team composed of Child, Xiangling, Bennett, and Kazuha, Child's damage is significant but doesn't make up a majority of the team's damage. This means that players will need to split their investment among the team members. This is less of a problem for veteran players who likely have the resources to gear multiple units or have already geared them. For newer players, however, this can be quite an expensive barrier. The third problem with Child is Xingqiu. While it is true that replacing Xingqiu is a very large benefit, this is a two-way street. It means that Xingqiu can also replace Child. Xingqiu's damage is much more locked to a single target than Child's, but Xingqiu's teams will typically outdamage Child in single target situations. Additionally, with a grouper like Kazuha in the team, Xingqiu can hit multiple targets to some degree, though his AoE Hydra application will still fall short compared to Child's. As such, Child's value is in large part tied to how valuable Xingqiu is to a player's roster. In summary, Child is an extremely strong unit, provided players have a strong knowledge of rotations and have invested in multiple units. Additionally, his value is somewhat tied to Xingqiu's, as a large part of his identity is his strong Hydra application. So when should you roll for Child? Players should roll for Child if they need Xingqiu for hyper carries such as Diluc or Hu Tao, but still need a unit who can apply Hydro for off-field DPS characters like Xiangling. It's also recommended to roll for Child even if you don't need Xingqiu but are interested in clearing abyss floors quickly and easily. Most abyss floors have multiple enemies, which allow for Child's AoE damage capability to shine. Additionally, players who are interested in speedrunning may see a lot of value in him, as his high burst potential combined with his high team DPS windows allow players to speedrun floors very easily. Now, when shouldn't you roll for Child? It's hard to recommend rolling for Child if you already have him, as his constellations aren't too impactful. It's also hard to recommend rolling for Child if players aren't willing to learn his team comp rotations and invest into multiple units, as Child's team is pivotal to bringing out his full potential. In addition, players with no need for his on-field Hydra application may find that he doesn't really fit into any teams on their account. Thanks for watching this overview of the Keqing Main's Theory Crafting staff's thoughts on Child. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and we'll do our best to answer.